The worst advice in the Bible, and the king who followed it, King Rehoboam. My friends, my brothers and sisters, let us not merely glance at the story of Rehoboam, but sit with it, feel the weight of its tragedy, and listen for the echoes of its spiritual warnings in our own lives. For his is not just a tale of a king's failure. It is a profound and emotionally charged saga of a soul's journey from immense privilege to a legacy defined by loss. Imagine, if you will, the world into which Rehoboam was born. It was the zenith of Israel's power and glory. The air still hummed with the wisdom of his father, King Solomon, a man who spoke with God and whose name was synonymous with prosperity. The very ground he walked upon was a testament to his grandfather, King David, a man after God's own heart. Rehoboam was not just a prince, he was the heir to a divine promise, the direct inheritor of a kingdom blessed by God himself. He was born into the magnificent, albeit heavy, mantle of the house of David. He had it all: wealth beyond measure, military might, and a unified nation. But this very abundance was a gilded cage, for it insulated him from the very lessons that forged character. He was taught to reign, but not to serve. He was born into a throne, but his heart had not yet been prepared to seek the Lord.
You've probably heard of Solomon, the wisest king who ever lived, famous for his wealth, his proverbs, and the majestic temple he built in Jerusalem. But what about his son? Do you know the story of Rehoboam? Very few people do, and perhaps that's why this is one of the most surprising and tragic narratives in all of Israel's history. Rehoboam inherited a well-established empire, a respected throne, a people who still lived under the shadow of the glory from the days of David and Solomon. Everything was in place for him to carry on his father's legacy, but one reckless decision, one prideful response, and what was once grand became fragmented. It was under Rehoboam's reign that the kingdom of Israel was torn in two, a division that would not be healed for centuries, all because of a poorly handled moment, a disastrous piece of advice, and a heart that was not fully committed to the Lord.
The emotional and spiritual climax of his story unfolds at Shechem. The people, burdened by Solomon's grand building projects and heavy taxes, came with a plea that was more a desperate whisper than a demand. Lighten the hard service of your father and his heavy yoke upon us, and we will serve you. Their hearts were open, their loyalty conditional upon a small act of mercy.
The death of Solomon marked the end of a magnificent chapter in Israel's history. For 40 years, the people lived under the reign of a man celebrated for his unparalleled wisdom. Under his leadership, the kingdom flourished. The imposing temple in Jerusalem was built, the borders expanded, riches filled the cities. Alliances were formed with neighboring powers, and an era of splendor was established. However, this glory came at a cost. Behind the brilliance, there was an increasing burden on the shoulders of the people. Extremely high taxes, forced labor, and a load that became harder and harder to bear. With Solomon's passing, the throne could not remain empty. The rightful heir was his son, Rehoboam.
Here, Rehoboam stood at a sacred crossroads. The elders, the men who walked with Solomon, who had seen the rise and fall of nations, who understood the divine covenant, offered him the path of humility. If you will be a servant to this people today and serve them and give them a good answer, they will be your servants forever. This was an offer of true power.
Made a direct appeal to the future king, and that appeal could not be ignored. Your father placed a heavy yoke upon us. If you now lighten this burden, we will serve you with loyalty. It was more than a simple request. It reflected years of silent suffering. Under Solomon's reign, although Israel had experienced days of splendor, it came at a high cost. Lavish palaces, fortresses, and monumental works required an unrelenting labor force. Men were forced to leave their families to serve the king. The fields were taxed to the limit. The people were tired, physically and emotionally exhausted. And now, before the new ruler, they saw an opportunity for change. They did not want war nor rebellion. They simply wanted to be heard. They longed for a king who understood their pain and would lead with compassion. It was the first major moment of his reign, and also his first great test. At that moment, it was not merely an administrative matter, it was a rare opportunity, the chance to begin a new chapter, to restore the people's trust, to calm troubled hearts, and to solidify the unity of the kingdom. The tribe's plea was not just political, it was emotional, spiritual, and social. And Rehoboam's response would define not only the tone of his reign, but the destiny of an entire nation. During the next 3 days, everything hung in suspense. The people waited, the elders watched, and Rehoboam had to choose. Would he follow the path of empathy or reinforce the harshness of the past? The throne awaited him, but the kind of king he would choose to be had yet to be revealed. 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 5. His first step was to consult those who had lived through Israel's brightest days, the elders who had served alongside his father, Solomon. These advisors were not inexperienced. They were men who had witnessed the kingdom at its height, participated in great political and spiritual decisions, and learned over the years that true leadership is not about domination, but about knowing how to listen. They understood the dangers of vanity and power, and recognized that a wise king is not the one who imposes more, but the one who best understands the needs of his people. Rehoboam summoned them and went straight to the point. "What advice do you give me? How should I answer this people?" 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 6. The elder's reply was firm, clear, and full of discernment. "If today you will be a servant to this people and speak to them with kindness, they will serve you forever." 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 7. In other words, they advised, be approachable, show respect, lighten the burden, treat the people with justice, and they will follow you with loyalty. The wisdom behind those words was profound. It was an invitation to build a reign founded on humility, not on oppression, to win hearts, not by force, but through trust. But those words did not sit well in Rehoboam's heart. Perhaps he expected harsher advice, an encouragement to assert his authority, something that would affirm his newly acquired power. Perhaps he saw humility as a sign of weakness rather than greatness. The fact is, he hesitated.
The power of a heart-to-heart connection with his people, a bond of love and trust that no enemy could ever break. But Rehoboam turned away from their weathered wisdom and sought the counsel of his own contemporaries, the young men who had grown up in the same bubble of privilege.
The coronation ceremony was set to take place in the city of Shechem, a symbolic choice, rich with meaning. It was there that Abraham built an altar to the Lord. It was also in Shechem that Joshua renewed the covenant between God and Israel. It wasn't just a geographical location, but a place of memories, decisions, and consecrations. Not by chance, representatives from all the tribes gathered there. The atmosphere was filled with anticipation and tension. Even before Rehoboam officially assumed the throne, something unexpected happened. The people, gathered in Shechem, in light of this, Rehoboam made a decision that seemed wise. He asked for a period of 3 days to respond. He wanted time to reflect, seek counsel, and decide with clarity. It was knowing he could not make such an important decision on his own, Rehoboam chose to seek counsel. After all, the weight of a kingdom demands wisdom, and the moment called for caution. And in that hesitation, he sought another voice. Instead of following the counsel of the wise, Rehoboam turned now to the young men with whom he had grown up. Childhood and youth companions, raised in the luxurious halls of the palace, surrounded by privilege, status, and little awareness of the people's suffering. They were men who knew comfort, but not the cries of the fields. And, more importantly, they were men who told the king what he wanted to hear. Rehoboam then presented them with the same situation. "These people have asked me to lighten the yoke my father placed upon them. What is your opinion?" 1 Kings chapter 12, Verse 9. Tell the people this, my little finger is thicker than my father's waist. If he punished you with whips, I will punish you with scorpions. 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 10 and 11. It was the voice of arrogance, of power imposed by force. They advised Rehoboam not to yield, to show that he was even more powerful than Solomon. It was as if they were saying, do not show weakness, rule through fear. And Rehoboam accepted it. He rejected the advice of the elders, experienced men who feared God, to follow the guidance of those who merely fed his ego. He traded wisdom for vanity, humility for imposition. The choice that seemed to show firmness was, in truth, the beginning of collapse. 3 days passed, just as he had promised. The people returned to Shechem. There was a sense of anticipation in the air. Many were hopeful, believing that the new king would begin his reign with compassion and justice. It was the chance for a new beginning, for a reign more in touch with the people. But before the gathered crowd, Rehoboam's words were like sharp blades cutting through every thread of trust. My father made your yoke heavy. I will make it even heavier. My father punished you with whips. I will punish you with scorpions. The silence that followed was not one of respect. It was of outrage.
Their advice was a mirror of his own heart, hard, unyielding, and arrogant. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions. This wasn't just a political misstep, it was a spiritual catastrophe. In that single brutal statement, Rehoboam was not only rejected the counsel of the wise, but he rejected the very nature of a compassionate, merciful king, a reflection of the God of Israel. He chose the path of a tyrant, believing that fear and force were greater tools than love and service. The spiritual fallout was immediate and devastating. The kingdom split with a soundless war. 10 tribes declared, "What portion have we in David? We have no inheritance in the son of Jesse."
Among those present, one name stood out: Jeroboam, son of Nebat. A former servant of Solomon, he had rebelled years earlier at the Lord's command and sought refuge in Egypt. Now, with the king's death, Jeroboam returned to Israel, not just as a former opponent, but as the voice of a collective feeling that resonated among the tribes. The hope that had begun to blossom in the hearts of the people turned into revolt. That harsh response was like a spark cast into a dry field. It ignited the soul of the tribes. It was the final trigger. Rehoboam, thinking he was securing his authority, was in truth digging the chasm that would separate him from the majority of the tribes of Israel. The people, who were already carrying a heavy burden in the days of Solomon, now saw in the new king not a liberator, but an even more ruthless tyrant. The message was clear. Rehoboam did not want dialogue. He wanted domination. And then came the rupture. The 10 northern tribes rose in protest. Zebulun, Naphtali, Ephraim, Dan, and all the others united in a single cry of separation. The leaders of the people, wounded by the king's harshness, declared loudly, "What portion do we have in the house of David? What inheritance do we have in the son of Jesse? To your tents, O Israel. Now look after your own house, O David." 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 16. With that cry of rupture, what was once a united kingdom under David and glorified by Solomon, split in two. Like a once imposing wall suddenly beginning to crack, Israel watched as its tribes separated before their very eyes. The unity that had been built with so much effort now collapsed, and the northern tribes, completely rejecting Rehoboam's leadership, chose a new king, Jeroboam, the same man who had returned from exile in Egypt after Solomon's death. Jeroboam was no ordinary figure. Years earlier, he had been chosen by God himself. The prophet Ahijah had delivered to him a clear message. The kingdom would be divided as judgment for Solomon's unfaithfulness. Idolatry, the altars to foreign gods, the broken covenant with the Lord, all of that would bring consequences. It was the faithful fulfillment of the word of God. Judgment had come. From that moment on, Israel ceased to be one nation. 2 kingdoms arose, the northern kingdom called Israel, formed by the 10 tribes that rebelled. Jeroboam became their new king, and although initially the government was itinerant, Later, the capital would be established in Samaria. The southern kingdom, Judah, remained under the command of Rehoboam. He retained the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, keeping Jerusalem as the capital and the temple as the spiritual center.
The spiritual and emotional unity of the nation, so painstakingly built by David and Solomon, was shattered in a single day. The name of the new king, Jeroboam, would forever be linked to he who made Israel sin, and Rehoboam, the supposed enlarger of his people, was left to rule over the smaller southern kingdom of Judah.
Rehoboam, stunned by the rejection, still attempted to regain control. He sent Adoniram, the same official responsible for overseeing the forced labor, perhaps to negotiate, perhaps to impose authority, but the gesture was poorly received. The enraged people gave him no chance. They stoned Adoniram to death, 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 18. That act was more than just a message. It was confirmation that the separation was final and dangerous. Overcome by fear, Rehoboam fled from Shechem and rushed back to Jerusalem. He feared the rebellion would turn into war.
His action fulfilled a prophecy, but it was a consequence of his own sin. The tragedy is that the kingdom was torn from him not because he was weak or betrayed, but because he was unwilling to humble himself. Yet even in this fractured state, God's grace pursued him. When Rehoboam, in a fit of prideful rage, assembled an army to wage war on his newly estranged brothers, the prophet Shemaiah, the man of God, stepped forward. With an authority that transcended the throne, he delivered the word of the Lord. You shall not go up or fight against your brothers, the son of Israel, for this thing is from me.
And indeed, upon reaching the capital, he decided to act. He summoned 180,000 warriors from the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, a massive army, with the purpose of attacking Jeroboam and forcibly reunifying the kingdom. That was when God intervened directly and unmistakably. At the height of the tension, when everything seemed to be heading toward war between brothers, the Lord raised up the prophet Shemaiah with a clear and firm message for Rehoboam and all the army he had gathered. Do not go up to fight against your brothers, the sons of Israel. Each of you return to your home, for I was the one who caused all this. There was no room for doubt. God was saying, this is not the work of chance, nor merely the result of human disputes. This division came from my own hands. It was judgment, it was correction. It was the exact fulfillment of what had already been prophesied. Solomon's idolatry, Rehoboam's hardness of heart, all of it was being answered with discipline from above. And then the most surprising thing happened. Rehoboam obeyed. He recognized the voice of the Lord and gave up the fight. The military march was cancelled, and the civil war for the time being was avoided. It was as if in a moment of clarity, Rehoboam had understood that resisting the will of God would be useless and disastrous. When God says, I have done this, no sword or army can undo what has been decreed.
This moment is profoundly emotional. Here is the king, filled with anger and a desire for revenge, stopped dead in his tracks by a humble messenger of God. Rehoboam's choice to obey Shemaiah's divine intervention is a flicker of light in his otherwise dark story. It shows a fleeting moment of recognition that his will was not supreme, that a higher power was at play. But this momentary act of submission was not a true change of heart. The Bible's final heartbreaking assessment of Rehoboam's reign is not a list of military defeats or political failures, but a spiritual one.
From that day forward, Israel would no longer be a unified nation. The splendor of the days of David and Solomon would remain in the past. Now, two realities took shape: the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And that division would last for centuries, leaving deep marks in the history and soul of the people. It was a rupture that began with a poorly made decision, fueled by pride and the refusal to listen to wise counsel, a mistake that unleashed irreversible consequences. But it was also a powerful reminder that behind human events there is a sovereign hand guiding history, the hand of God. With the kingdom divided and peace temporarily restored, Rehoboam had to face the reality before him. He now ruled only over Judah and Benjamin. The territory was smaller, the people were weakened, and trust had been shaken.
And he did evil because he had not set his heart to seek the Lord. He might have been temporarily humbled, but his heart was not truly transformed. He did not seek God for who he was, but only for what he could provide. And so his kingdom, despite his efforts to fortify it, fell into idolatry and spiritual decay. His legacy is not a list of triumphs, but a monument to a soul's failure to truly connect with the divine. Rehoboam's story is a timeless lesson, a deep well of emotional and spiritual truth. It reminds us that leadership is a spiritual calling, not a political game. It teaches us that true strength lies not in the harshness of our words or the weight of our power, but in the humility of a servant's heart. It is a powerful testament to the fact that when we fail to prepare our hearts to seek the Lord, we risk losing not only our earthly kingdoms, but the very essence of who we were created to be.
The story of Rehoboam up to that point teaches us something profound. The greatest danger for a people is not the enemy who comes from outside, but the pride that grows from within. It was self-reliance that opened the door to the fall, but it was humility that made room for mercy. Rehoboam reigned for 17 years in Jerusalem, the city that the Lord himself had chosen from among all the tribes of Israel to put his name there. It was there in the spiritual heart of the nation that he governed what remained of the once great united kingdom of his grandfather David and his father Solomon.
King Rehoboam. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, stay tuned for more Kings of Judah.
If these teachings bless you and you feel led to give, your support helps us share God's word freely. Scan the QR code to partner with us in this ministry. Thank you, and God bless.